Welcome to If the Public Only Knew, the show that pulls back the curtain on what it really takes to build and lead a business. Host Gary Cinderbrandt sits down with some of today's most dynamic CEOs, founders, and leaders to dig into their origin stories, hard-earned lessons, and the missteps that nearly derailed it all. These are unfiltered, no-hype conversations designed to inspire, challenge, and fuel your own journey. Now here's your host, Gary Cinderbrandt.
Welcome back to If the Public Only Knew. I'm your host, Gary Cinderbrandt. Today we're joined by someone that didn't necessarily start out to go into wealth management, but identified an opportunity that I think you're going to be interested in hearing. Anders Jones originally came out of Stanford and Wharton and was destined, he thought, for a career on Wall Street. He fortunately made a good decision because the timing wasn't so great. It was 2009. And people were trying to figure out whether there'd be a Wall Street by the time we got to 2010. Using his background, his skills, and some personal things that happened to him, he decided there was an opportunity in the wealth management market that had yet to be addressed and started to move in that direction. Today, he's the CEO of an outfit called Facet Wealth. And Anders, it's a pleasure having you on the podcast.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
This is an amazing story, I have to tell you. It fills in so many gaps. And as you and I were discussing before we started recording, my approach to wealth management, as many of my listeners know and many of my friends and clients and colleagues know, basically, I cooked up along the way because I didn't like the way things looked, but went after a different market on the wealth management space. Fewer people, larger amounts of money. But it didn't mean that people in this mass affluent market didn't have needs, because they absolutely did. You identified an opportunity in 2009, which was a hell of a time to be thinking about this, and built something which I have to tell you, I'm incredibly impressed with. Take me through graduation. You're going to go to Wall Street, and then things start to change. Take me through that story, if you would.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I didn't end up in financial services immediately. I took a little bit of a detour through the advertising technology world in 2009. Was on the early team of a company called LiveRamp, which was, if you've ever shopped online and the thing that you're looking at kind of follows you around for the next 2 weeks, we did a version of that. So sorry about that. But you know, got the entrepreneurial bug right out of school, and you know, was fortunate to be in Silicon Valley when the sort of Web 2 revival was happening, and it was a great time to be there. So after we sold LiveRamp, I was doing some early stage venture investing, and got very interested in what was going on in wealth tech, fintech. This was 2014, 2015, so right around the time when the first wave of robo-advisors was really getting off the ground and getting a lot of traction. So Wealthfront, Betterment, Personal Capital. And so it felt like there was something changing in financial advice. And it's funny, because if you actually look back at some of the articles that were being written back then, there was all this discussion around, is this the end of human advisors? And you know, I think we're having that conversation now a little bit too with AI coming out. And you know, I'm still pretty bullish on human advice, you know, certainly for the next 5 to 10 years. But it's kind of funny to go back and, you know, rewind a decade and see people worried about it even then. But the big aha moment for us was when in 2015 the DOL fiduciary rule came out, and the pushback from the industry was, if you pass this, you're going to have 8 million households lose their relationship with their advisor, because the advisor can't afford to both act in their best interest and work with them at the same time, which was such a mind-blowing admission of, yeah, we're screwing 8 million households, but like better for them to be sort of mildly screwed than completely ignored. And I think the light bulb went off in a couple ways, which was, you know, number one, there's a huge market out there of folks that will opt in for financial advice, even if it's actually not the best thing for them. Number two, there's a serious cost service problem in the industry. The cost of delivering high quality financial advice is too high for the vast majority of Americans. And then number three is the asset-based model, which we could have a debate about whether or not that's the right way to charge a retail client, specifically when you're doing financial planning for. But that is a very exclusionary model, and there's about 100 million American households that don't have assets to manage or enough assets to manage to get the attention of an advisor, but they still very much need and will pay for financial advice. And so when we put all of those pieces together, that's really what the genesis of Facet was. And to this day, we're still very true to to those core pillars of lower cost, subscription based financial advice, dedicated human advisors who are all CFPs, and a focus on the mass affluent market, folks that no one else in the industry is really serving.
Let me just to clarify for the sake of the listeners who aren't familiar with the DOL rule, for the most part, prior to the proposal of that rule, there was a standard of suitability. Is this investment suitable? Didn't necessarily also mean it was in the client's best interest. In the client's best interest means that you've looked at every possible thing you can do, and there's nothing better for this particular client to do, regardless of what the cost is. So that segregated a lot of people. Now, I will say that the best advisors out there, though, the advisors that I interact with on a regular basis, we, even before the DOL BI rule, basically acted as fiduciaries. And you'll find the most successful advisors in the ultra high net worth market do act that way because it's a smart market and these people can figure it out. But for you to identify that and then apply technology to this mass affluent market where the needs are absolutely present, I think is just outstanding. So you have this great idea and you start moving in this direction. What was the first thing you did?
Well, step one was find a financial advisor to start the business with, because I don't know anything about financial advice, and to this day I actually so my co-founder is a guy named Brent Weiss. We had a few co-founders actually, but our advisor co-founder is this guy Brent Weiss, and he was an advisor at a high net worth firm in just outside of Baltimore in Maryland, and so he and his story was, he grew up in sort of a lower middle class household, and when he was working for this firm, he actually wasn't able to give financial advice to his family because they didn't meet that firm's minimums, and so he had sort of independently arrived at this idea of there's got to be a better way. It's like the way he described it is like, we're selling the Ritz, and there's a lot of people who would pay for the Marriott, but the Marriott doesn't exist. And so when he and I met, it was sort of like this meeting of the minds. And fortunately, I had sort of the tech and startup background, and he had the financial advice background and mindset. And so in 2016, we met in early 2016. And then we put the rest of the team together, recruited some tech folks. I'm also not a software engineer, so needed a couple of those. And then kind of had the founding team together in mid 2016, built a prototype, and then kind of launched to the world in early 2017. One kind of interesting piece of Facet lore that is probably buried in the page 7 or 8 of Google search results about us is our sort of first go-to-market approach was to go to other advisors and say, hey, you're probably working with a bunch of clients that are actually not a great fit for you, that you've picked up along the way. Going back to the idea that there's 8 million households that their advisors aren't acting in their best interest. We said, well, why don't we go and actually just try and buy those clients and sort of partial book acquisitions from existing advisor relationships. And I'd say, we banged our head against the wall for 2 or 3 years trying to do that. And there were a whole number of issues with that strategy. But, ultimately what we realized is that we had built a better mousetrap and there was plenty of organic demand. And so we ended up going direct to consumer, purely direct to consumer in 2018. And, that the rest is history.
So you started thinking you could possibly go B2B. Were you approaching registered investment advisors or brokerage firms?
Both actually. And the idea was not to sell the software or anything like that. It was, hey, literally, we're going to, if you look at your book, somewhere between 50 and 75% of your clients, you're actually losing money on. And we will pay you a revenue multiple on those folks. And you can go focus on your high net worth clients, and we'll take great care of these people. Which the first meeting always went incredibly well, because like, oh my God, this makes all the sense in the world. When it actually came down to picking up the phone and calling a client saying, hey, I don't work with you anymore, meet Facet, that's when it all fell apart. And, and look, I think credit where credit's due. I spent a lot of time sort of, dunking on traditional advisors. There's some incredibly caring and wonderful advisors out there who really care about their client relationships and do a great job for those folks. And I think that was kind of what we ran into, is that it was very hard to sort of separate the advisor from the relationship, even if it made sense on paper.
You're hitting into something that I have been an advocate for my entire career. And unfortunately, the firms do pretty much of a crappy job in servicing that down market. UBS has a wealth advisory unit, an 800 number you can call. Merrill Lynch has Edge or Bank Advisors. Not sure what Morgan Stanley's doing. But they've attempted to increase their client minimums. For instance, at a lot of these firms, less than $250,000, they don't pay you on anything. So they don't want to encourage it.
Yeah.
But to me, that's harsh. It really is. It should be up to the advisor as to where they want to allocate their time. The problem is, I looked at it a little bit differently. You went at it from the standpoint of, look, you're losing money on these clients.
Yeah.
I go at it from the perspective, when I do a consulting arrangement, of you've got 200 clients on your book, 40 of them basically are giving you 80% of your revenue. Are you giving them 80% of your time? And they all kind of look at their shoes.
Yeah.
And I say, how do you think they would feel if they realized that they were financing your ability to answer a dividend question at 6 o'clock on a Friday afternoon from someone with $67,000 with you? Well, I wouldn't be talking to them anyway. Yeah, but you could be thinking about them. You could talk to them more. And that was the genesis of, especially at Merrill, of really encouraging people. And Merrill at that time did have a customer services unit you could move clients to. And when it presented it that way to the clients and you were honest about it, most of the clients said, yeah, whatever, I don't hear from you anyway. But from the FA's perspective, they're dealing with this whole raft of people and they're terrified of moving them. From a client's perspective, all they see is the FA. So it's really kind of a mind game. I think your initial approach made sense. I might have positioned it a little bit differently from the standpoint of embarrassing the hell out of them.
Yeah.
And saying, what if we called your clients? What if your clients found out you were doing this? They go, shit. Well, they never bother me. Yes, they do. They're there.
Yeah.
What did you tell them when you brought them on board? And, you're a new FA. I'm going to take care of you for the rest of my life. So I really applaud what you did. How did you go out? How did you go to market when you went from B2B to B2C?
We basically stood up a bunch of digital demand generation channels. So, everything that you would expect from a, sort of digital consumer brand, we did. We had a heavy, we had a big relationship with an affiliate provider called Smart Asset, which you've probably come across, but
I'm aware of them.
Yeah. So we grew very quickly with them. And then, over time, we sort of diversified to our, as our brand has become more, it's become sort of more well-known and we've been able to just kind of do our own thing. We also, we offer a fundamentally different service than most other advisors. And so what we find is that we kind of need to control the messaging about what you're getting and what the experience is from the very first stage of the funnel. But now at this point, we've got, I don't know, probably 50 or so different channels that we onboard folks from, sort of the classic search, social media, things like that. We're also doing some really interesting stuff with brand ambassadors and influencers. So there's like this whole crop of folks that you may or may not have seen that have cropped up on Instagram and TikTok that are sort of they give financial advice. Some of them are actually advisors, others just are kind of smart folks that that have views, and then others have no business giving advice whatsoever. So we pick the ones that are the good ones, and we have relationships with them, and they are ambassadors of the Facet brand. So, that's a big one. Referrals, client referrals. That's also a big channel for us. So kind of all of the above.
When you look at, for instance,
Yeah.
Smart Asset's business model, they do a lot of work with different RIAs, is they'll encourage the client to give them a bunch of information, then they'll bid out that lead. Did you
Yeah.
have an arrangement where you would have a certain number of leads directed your way? Was it a revenue sharing arrangement? How did you work it with them? They're pretty clever about what they do.
Yeah, no, they've built a great business, and I think credit to Michael Carvin and the team over there. I mean, they've done a good job building that business, and I think there are a lot of RIAs that have built. I mean, they're almost like the sort of next iteration of the custodian referral program, right? Like, you remember, how Schwab and Fidelity and those guys had they would just send referrals, and there are $10 billion+
Sure.
RIAs that are built solely on that. I mean, I think Smart Asset is sort of the next iteration of that. We had a variety of arrangements with them over the years. I mean, one thing that was beneficial is that we could service folks with asset levels that were smaller than what other advisors would bid on. So that I think was one of the reasons why our relationship grew as big as it did. And so but yeah, no, they were a great partner for us.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And the fact that you were able to pivot as which is usually a death knell for a lot of startups, shows the fact that you and then went to multiple channels to bring
Yeah.
that in makes a great deal of sense. So
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say there's another element to this too, where we got lucky very early on. We we did the sort of classic startup path of raising venture capital, and we raised a reasonable seed round in 2017, and then in 2018 we raised a $33 million Series A, which was led by Warburg Pincus. And I think two interesting points here. One is in 2018, a $33 million Series A was like unheard of. It was massive. I mean, today that's like, a large seed round for an AI startup. Actually, it's probably a small seed round for an AI startup. But back then it was real money. But the second point is that, Warburg Pincus is a sort of global growth equity investor, and they are typically writing checks in the, $300 to $500 million range into, EBITDA positive growth companies. And they had a view on the future of financial advice to the mass affluent. I mean, they're in, they were in the mutual fund store, they're in Edelman, they're in financial engines. Like they have a long history of investing in sort of mass affluent and mass market financial services. And they heard about us when we were basically pre-revenue or, pretty close to it. And they said, look, your thesis and our thesis matches exactly. And we spent a lot of time with them. We were a little skeptical of bringing in, sort of old school private equity. But they ended up being amazing, or they continue to be amazing partners for us, and still very big financial supporters of ours. But that also, I think, gave us an ability to experiment a little bit with different go-to-market channels, and we had more flexibility than I think a typical startup at our stage would have.
Interesting. A couple of things come to mind. We know that I don't know if you saw the recent McKinsey report on what's happening in financial advisory.
I see a bunch of them, but tell me which one you're thinking about.
Well, this one's going to be kind of right in your pathway. There's a growing shortage over the next 5 to 8 years. There's an estimate of 110,000 less financial advisors than exist today, and due to retirement. And there's not a lot of people coming in the business. And the ones that are coming in the business, frankly, are poorly trained. Most of the firms have left the training up to, you pass the test, we stick you on a team with a senior advisor, and we hope things work out. That's not working out for a number of reasons, not the least of which is, and I'll address something you said earlier, human advisor versus AI. At some point, yeah, maybe. But as clients get older, the things they value most are not scientifically what should we do with our money. What they value most are investments that matter to them socially and personally, and an advisor that knows them and cares about them. Empathy becomes a huge part of this. Their fee sensitivity goes down as time goes by. So they're willing to pay for it. If they get a guy like me or one of my colleagues that they know, look, we're there, call us anytime, we're on you, and we're going to call you because we're going to live your life with you. Now, we can't do that with everybody, but we can do that with 100 people that have 20 million each, and it's a great book of business. So that's what the best advisors are doing. And I would guess.
By the way,
go ahead.
Just to interject there, it's funny you talk about empathy. We refer to our advisors as therapists with calculators.
Yeah,
like
great.
The value is not in the human value is not in the financial planning,
That's
right?
correct.
I mean, that's very automatable, and that's technology to do that. But we are decades away from someone being able to sit down across from a computer and build that same level of trust and empathy and understanding. Not going to happen.
I went through a lot of your stuff, and you place a premium on educating your clients, and you do it with small words, which I really like. Because I go up against people sometimes with big words, and sometimes I'll just say, I have no idea what you're talking about. Break that down. Pretend I'm not as smart as you, and tell me what you're talking about. 9 times out of 10, it's just bullshit. So good for you.
We have an interesting challenge, which, people always say, oh, who are your competitors? And it's, we certainly have competitors, but I mean, as you know, it's not a winner take all industry. So I don't think as much about sort of like, oh yeah, we're selling against Vanguard and like we have to go head to head against them. It's not really how I think about it. But instead, so we today work with about 16,000 households across the country. And 80% of them have never worked with a financial advisor before. So if you think about it, our biggest competition is DIY. And that informs our entire customer acquisition and customer retention strategy, which is it's all an education game. And so, you talk about the content that we create and using small words. We're a lot of times we're starting from scratch around, okay, what is financial planning and why do I need it? And so we've leaned really, really heavily into content and education, and also we call sort of edutainment to keep people engaged and just start from the basics.
What would happen if all of a sudden you had 50,000 clients on board in the next 6 months? Are you built to scale? Are you more of a SaaS business, or are you going to have to staff up, or what does that look like at almost a per client acquisition cost? What do you need to do internally to scale it up?
Yeah, so we're somewhere in between, I would say. So taking a step back, one of the sort of core components of lowering the cost structure is increasing advisor efficiency. And that was sort of like the very first piece of technology we built was, okay, how do we automate the things that are not an advisor's highest and best use? And, the conversation we just had, like time in front of the client, we actually call them members, but time in front of the member or, time spent, with the member is the most important thing. So we, over time, have kind of automated away more and more of that. And frankly, we sort of hit the timing with AI kind of perfectly. I mean, that was a little serendipitous for us, but, so the industry average advisor works with about 75 clients. It sounds like some of the folks that you work with are even fewer than that. Our advisors work with 450. And what's interesting is if you actually look at the hours per year that one of our members gets with the advisor, it's more than what they would get in a traditional setting. And frankly, given their wealth level, it's way more. And so our gross margins look much more like a software business. And our ability to scale is much greater than a traditional advisory firm. So can we go from 15 to 50 in 6 months? That might stretch things a little bit, but our plan next year is to grow at a pretty healthy clip. And it wouldn't shock me if, end of 26, we're sitting here with 50,000 members.
So my thinking would be coming from the other side and knowing the issues these firms have. And I appreciate the fact that, you do have some fixed costs, but the overwhelming need at every single firm on every single book that I consult on is that lower tier where you guys are absolutely set up to provide that service.
Yeah.
Have you considered the possibility of white labeling for the large advisory firms?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. I think for us, white labeling is hard for a couple reasons. One is that, we have, if you think about the segment of the population that we serve and the demographic that we serve, they have a fundamentally different planning need than a high net worth segment does. And so, and like a very specific example around that is around like cash flow planning. So if you're high net worth, you're thinking about your cash flow on probably like an annual, maybe twice a year basis. And, the whole planning process is geared towards having that conversation once a year. The planning technology it exists to have that conversation once a year. If you're mass affluent, you're actually thinking about each paycheck, how is that getting allocated? And you're thinking about the different trade-offs you're making around, am I saving more this month? Am I paying off debt this month? Am I, contributing to some other goal that I have this month, whatever it might be? Or maybe, I have a tuition payment that I need to make. And so, cash flow is going to be a little lumpy this month. And so we've built our whole tech stack with that customer in mind.
I'm with you on that. I'm going to share a slide with you. I rarely do this in a live cast, but I want you to look at this slide because this is a typical financial advisor's book. You should be seeing the screen.
Yep.
It's an FA running $250 million, 150 households. And this is just broken up quantitatively right now. I do also do a qualitative measurement. I do a bunch of stuff when I analyze these things. Down here, these are not your clients in these top two tiers. But as you can see, it's 42% of the household and close to 90% of the revenue. This is mass affluent down here. These people don't get called. Nobody's paying attention to them. They absolutely have the needs you're describing.
We do a great job for those folks.
Yeah, if you look at this number here, I would tell you just flat out, they're better off with you than with this advisor, period.
Yeah, well, tell that advisor to call us. We're still buyers.
No, I understand that. What I'm saying is that every firm wrestles with this and does not have a solution. What you've built, which you can scale your service faster than your costs are going to grow, to me is where the things should go. Every firm has tried to do what you're doing and they can't do it. You've recognized things that the big firms just aren't going to develop. And instead, they're just going to ignore the market. I'm really impressed with what you've done. I think it fits maybe even better than because you don't know this side of the desk where I've lived my entire career. But I'm looking at this thinking if I ran one of these firms, I'd be all over you guys to see what we could do to fold in a white label offering with the level of service you have. It might bury you with work because there's literally tens of millions of people in this category. That need your help. So well done, you. Anyway,
well, still early days. We like I said, we're about 16,000 households, and we've got we estimate it's about 100 million household market. So there is another Fidelity sized company to be built here, and that's what we're focused on.
You also, I think, would probably not be surprised if some of the larger firms start to learn what you're doing is they come and take you out and just plug you into their mass affluent market because it's underserved. It represents risk to the financial advisor. There's compliance risk. There's all sorts of problems down here. And I would tell you that knowing the FAs that I consult with, if I said, look, if you could do something like this is what they're offering, they wouldn't just say, sign me up. They'd sign up that day. Because what I try and do is encourage them on the clients they're not talking to carve those out to their younger associates that are on their team and basically compensate them for growing those assets because they sure as hell don't know how to prospect. So in that regard, at least somebody's calling them, but it's still not ideal. So I think that your possibilities here are endless. So good for you, man.
We're excited about what we're doing for sure.
You should be.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be surprised if you see something from us, in the near future around the workplace too. This is also, you think about certainly from a consumer standpoint, there's a big need, but there's also an increasing amount of discussion just from employers around how do we provide financial wellness, how do we provide financial resiliency to our workforce. There's a ton of data out there about if you have someone whose financial health is high, they're way more productive as a worker than if they have some sort of financial stress in their life. And so, I think there's a lot of opportunity there as well.
Now, you do your own clearing and you have custody?
No, we partner primarily with Apex for clearing and custody. We do have relationships with Fidelity and Schwab also. At this point, we manage. Actually, yesterday we crossed the $5 billion mark. So
that's outstanding. That's wonderful.
Yeah. But yeah, we have our own internal investment team. We have a chief investment officer. Our approach to investments is definitely not trying to beat the market. It's how do we get someone in the market with a very low cost, sort of broad-based market participation approach. We do have some more sophisticated offerings around direct indexing and some alternative exposure. To a certain subset of our members, that's an important feature. But yeah, we have a pretty solid investment lineup.
Yeah, and I also noticed you guys actively rebalance when needed to rebalance away from risk, which is something I've advocated my entire career. Most FAs, we're making money, let it run. Well, let's talk about the mathematics of loss for a minute. See how you feel about that. And they're like, oh yeah, you're right. This is awesome, man. Good for you. I'm really, really thrilled to have met you. Anything, people find you at facet.com if they're interested?
Yep. Yes, indeed.
You may have some of my colleagues reaching out to you directly. I have your email. I might give it to them. They might say, hey, let's move these people over. Anyway, well done. I think you're meeting a significant need in the marketplace. And I think you've got, absolutely, you've built a good moat around what you're doing. You got first mover advantage. I just love the whole model. Well done, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today on If the Public Only Knew. We've been talking to Anders Jones. And if you don't think you're getting the kind of service from your advisor, the attention you should, hey, I'm not trying to diss full service advisory, but if they're not living up to what they told you they were going to do when you first signed with them some years ago, look up facet.com. I think you'd be a lot better off. Anders, thanks again for joining.
Thanks, Gary.
Thanks for tuning in to If the Public Only Knew. Don't forget to follow the show and share it with anyone who's ready for the real raw stories behind the business successes. Join Gary next time for another powerful conversation that will leave you inspired and ready to take action.